5 years. That's how long it had been since Dad died, since the Harper family scattered like leaves in a storm. I'd spent those years stitching us back together. Phone calls, emails, birthday cards, trying to keep the threads of our family from fraying completely. I'm Emily Harper, 32, a school teacher with no grand ambitions beyond making sure my students and my family felt seen. But the family? They were a tougher crowd. So when I proposed a reunion at Dad's old estate in Vermont, I poured everything into it. The sprawling countryside house with its ivy-covered walls and creaky oak floors was more than a building. It was Dad's heart, his legacy, the place where we'd all been whole. I thought one weekend together could remind us of that. I was wrong. The estate hadn't changed much. The air still smelled of pine and damp earth, and the rolling hills stretched out like a painting. I'd arrived a day early, dusting off the mahogany dining table, airing out the bedrooms, and setting up the porch for the barbecue. My hands shook as I hung a photo of Dad above the fireplace, his gray eyes crinkling in a smile, his arm around me at my high school graduation. This reunion was for him. For us. I imagined my brother, Mark, cracking jokes over beers, my mom, Helen, fussing over the food, even my uncle Richard and his daughter Laura, swapping stories about the old days. For one weekend, I wanted us to be the Harpers again. But the attic changed everything. I'd gone up there the night before everyone arrived, looking for Dad's old slide projector to show some family photos. The attic was a maze of boxes, moth-eaten blankets, and memories. I was elbow deep in a crate of Mom's knitting supplies when I found it. A small, locked wooden box tucked behind a broken lamp. The lock was rusted and it gave way with a tug. Inside was a single envelope, yellowed with age, addressed to me in Dad's unmistakable scrawl. My heart thudded as I opened it, the paper crackling under my fingers. "Emily," it read, "if you're reading this, I'm gone. There's something you need to know. The coins, my collection, are yours. They're hidden in the estate, safe from prying eyes. I never told Richard, but he's always suspected. Be careful. He's not what he seems. I trust you to protect our family's future. Love, Dad." Coins? I sat back on my heels, my breath catching. Dad had been a numismatist, always tinkering with his rare coin collection, but I thought it was just a hobby. The letter hinted at something bigger, a fortune, maybe millions, stashed somewhere in this house. And Richard, my uncle, knew about it? My mind raced. Richard, with his slick suits and salesman charm, had been Dad's business partner in their real estate days. Dad never spoke ill of him, but there'd always been a distance, a shadow in his eyes when Richard's name came up. If Dad didn't trust him, why had he kept this secret from me until now? I tucked the letter into my pocket, my pulse hammering. I wanted to believe it was a mistake, that Richard wouldn't betray us. But as I descended the attic stairs, the house felt different. Less like a sanctuary and more like a chessboard. I barely slept that night, replaying Dad's words. Be careful. He's not what he seems. The next morning, the family arrived. Mark showed up first, his pickup truck rattling into the driveway. He hugged me tightly, but his eyes were guarded, like he was bracing for drama. Mom came next, fussing about the flight from Chicago and how the estate needed a good cleaning. Then Richard and Laura pulled up in a gleaming SUV, Richard flashing a grin that didn't reach his eyes. Laura, my cousin, gave me a quick wave, but she seemed distracted, her gaze flickering to her father. The rest of the cousins trickled in, and by noon, the house was alive with chatter and laughter. On the surface, it was perfect, but I couldn't shake the letter's weight in my pocket. It was during the barbecue that I noticed it. Richard and Laura, off by the garden shed, their heads bent together, whispering. Laura's hands were animated, pointing toward the house, while Richard's expression was hard, calculating. I watched from the porch, a glass of lemonade forgotten in my hand. When Richard caught my eye, he smiled, too quickly, too smoothly, and steered Laura back to the crowd. My stomach twisted. I'd organized this reunion to bring us together, but that letter had cracked open a truth I couldn't ignore. Richard was hiding something, and I was going to find out what. I didn't confront him, not yet. I'd learned from years of wrangling middle schoolers that you don't win by rushing in. You watch, you listen, you plan. If Richard thought he could keep Dad's coins, my inheritance, my family's legacy, he was about to learn how wrong he was. I smiled back at him, raising my glass in a toast, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and resolve. Enjoy the reunion, I thought, because by Monday I'd make sure the truth came out, and it was going to be one hell of a show. The reunion begins. The initial joy of the reunion masks underlying tensions. The old manor creaked under the weight of memory as I stood at the threshold, watching the first cars roll up the gravel drive. The air was thick with autumn's bite, leaves skittering across the lawn like secrets too restless to stay buried. My father's house, George's house, loomed behind me, its gabled roof and ivy-choked walls a monument to everything he'd been. A unifier, a dreamer, a man who believed family could be more than blood. I clutched his letter in my pocket, the paper worn soft from days of reading, its words a map to something I didn't yet understand. 10 gold coins hidden somewhere in this house. A fortune, yes, but more than that, a test. He'd left me to find them, to prove I could hold this family together. I wasn't sure I was ready. The first to arrive was Helen, my mother, stepping out of a sleek black sedan like she'd just walked off a boardroom battlefield. Her silver hair was pulled tight, her eyes scanning the manor with the cold appraisal of someone who'd long since traded sentiment for strategy. "Emily," she said, her voice crisp as she kissed my cheek, her lips barely grazing skin. "You've let the place go." No mention of Dad, no pause for the weight of his absence. Just a jab, sharp and practiced. I forced a smile, guiding her inside where the scent of polished wood and old books waited like a hug she'd never give. Mark was next, my brother, who I hadn't seen in 3 years. Not since the fight at Dad's last Christmas when he'd called me naive for believing in the family's fairy tale. He looked older now, his jaw tight, his leather jacket scuffed at the elbows. He didn't hug me, just nodded, his eyes flicking to the house like it was a trap. "Still chasing Dad's ghosts?" he muttered, brushing past. I swallowed the sting. He'd come, hadn't he? That was something. The cousins trickled in after, Sarah with her nervous laugh, Tom with his booming voice, and Laura, Uncle Richard's daughter, all sharp cheekbones and sharper eyes. Laura moved like she was cataloging everything, her phone never far from her hand. And then Richard himself, striding up the drive with the easy confidence of a man who owned every room he entered. His suit was tailored, his smile wide, but his eyes were restless, darting to the windows, the roofline, the shadowed corners of the porch. "Emily, my dear," he said, pulling me into a hug that felt more like a performance. "You've done your father proud, hosting us all." His voice was warm, but his grip lingered a second too long, like he was sizing me up. Dinner was a sprawl of clinking glasses and forced laughter, the dining room aglow with candlelight that did little to soften the tension. I stood at the head of the table, my hands trembling as I raised a glass. "To Dad," I said, my voice catching. "To George, who believed we were strongest together. He built this house for us, for every laugh, every fight, every moment we chose to show up. He's gone, but we're here, and that's what he'd want." The room murmured agreement, glasses clinking, but Richard's eyes were on his plate, his fork tracing slow circles in the gravy. When I asked about the estate, about Dad's plans for it, he waved a hand, chuckling. "Let's not spoil the evening with business, Emily. Plenty of time for that." His tone was light, but his gaze flicked to Laura, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Later in the library, I found Mark slouched in an armchair, a whiskey in hand. The firelight carved shadows across his face, and for a moment, he looked like Dad. Same stubborn jaw, same weight in his eyes. I pulled the letter from my pocket and handed it to him. "Read it," I said. He scanned the page, his brow furrowing as he reached the part about the coins. 10 gold coins, he read aloud, his voice thick with skepticism. Hidden in the house? What is this, a treasure hunt? I leaned closer, keeping my voice low. It's more than that. Dad said they're worth a fortune, but they're also a message about us, about keeping the family whole. Mark snorted, tossing the letter on the table. Dad and his games. You really think there's anything here? But his eyes lingered on the paper, and when I pressed, he sighed. Fine, I'll help you look, but don't expect me to buy the fairy tale. We didn't hear the floorboard creak. Didn't see Laura in the doorway, her shadow stretching long across the rug. She was gone by the time I turned, but the air felt heavier, like the house itself was holding its breath. She'd heard enough, I was sure of it, and she'd run straight to Richard. By midnight, the manor was quiet. The guests scattered to their rooms. I wandered the halls, my flashlight catching glints of dust in the air. The coins could be anywhere. Behind a loose panel, under a floorboard, tucked in some forgotten nook Dad loved. I was checking the study when I heard voices, low and urgent, from the veranda. Richard's voice, smooth as silk, punctuated by the sharp chirp of a phone. Yes, tomorrow, he was saying. No, she doesn't suspect. Just keep the buyer ready. My stomach twisted. Buyer? For what? The estate? The coins? I pressed myself against the wall, heart pounding, as his footsteps faded into the night. The next morning, Richard was all charm, pouring coffee and regaling the cousins with stories of Dad's wild youth. But there was a shift in the room, a current I couldn't ignore. Sarah avoided my eyes. Tom's laugh was too loud, and Helen watched me like I was a puzzle she couldn't solve. Richard had been working them, I realized, planting doubts, spinning a narrative I couldn't hear. When I caught Laura whispering to Sarah, her eyes darting to me, I knew he was building a wall between me and the family. Emily's grieving, I overheard him say later, his voice dripping with pity. She's chasing shadows, poor thing. Best we handle the estate ourselves. I wanted to scream, to call him out right there, but his smile was a blade and I wasn't ready to bleed. Not yet. Instead, I watched him, noting the way his hand lingered on his phone, the way his eyes flicked to the staircase, the attic, the places Dad loved most. He was searching too. For the coins, for control, for whatever Dad had left behind. And he was better at this game than I was. Smoother, sharper, a man who'd spent years bending people to his will. But I had something he didn't. I had Dad's letter, his words burning in my chest. The coins are yours, Emily, if you can find them. They're proof of what matters most. I didn't know where they were, not yet, but I knew what they meant. Trust. Loyalty. The family we chose to fight for. Richard could play his games, turn the others against me, but I wasn't alone. Mark was with me, skeptical but here. The house was with me, every creak and shadow a whisper of Dad's faith. And somewhere, hidden in these walls, was the truth. I just had to find it before Richard did. Uncovering the truth. Emily and Mark's investigation intensifies, revealing Richard's greed. The library smelled of dust and secrets, its shelves heavy with leather-bound books Dad had loved but never read. Morning light slanted through the tall windows, catching motes that danced like ghosts. I stood on a ladder, my fingers tracing the spines while Mark rummaged through a drawer below, his muttering a low hum of frustration. We'd been at it for hours, searching for anything, a clue, a sign, a whisper of where Dad hid those 10 gold coins. His letter was folded in my pocket, its weight a reminder of what was at stake. Not just a fortune, but his trust in me to keep this family from fracturing. I wasn't sure I could. Anything? Mark called, slamming a drawer shut. His eyes were bloodshot, his leather jacket slung over a chair like he'd already given up. I shook my head, climbing down to join him. This is pointless, Em, he said, running a hand through his hair. What if the coins are just another of Dad's stories? I didn't answer, my gaze snagging on a painting above the fireplace. Dad's favorite, a stormy seascape with waves that seemed to churn. Something about it felt off, the frame too heavy for its size. I stepped closer, my heart kicking up. "Help me with this," I said. We lifted the painting down and there it was. A safe, small and black, embedded in the wall like a secret Dad had whispered to the house itself. Its dial gleamed, daring us to try. "Well, damn," Mark breathed, his skepticism cracking. We spun the dial, testing numbers. Dad's birthday, mine, the year he built the manor. Nothing. Mark kicked the wall, cursing, but I was already moving to Dad's old desk, its drawers a maze of papers and pens. My fingers brushed something cold in the back of one. A key, small and ornate, tucked beneath a false bottom. I held it up, its weight solid, real. "This has to be it," I said, my voice barely a whisper. The door creaked behind us, and I froze. Richard stood there, his smile sharp as a blade, his eyes flicking from the key in my hand to the safe. "What's this?" he asked, his voice smooth but laced with something darker. "Sneaking around, Emily? Digging for treasures while the rest of us sleep?" Mark stepped forward, his jaw tight, but I spoke first, my words tumbling out. "We're looking for answers, Richard. Dad left something for us, for all of us." His laugh was low, cutting. "For you, you mean? Hoarding the inheritance? Disrespecting George's memory?" I expected better. He turned, his voice carrying as he called out, "Helen! You'll want to see this?" They came like vultures. Helen with her cold stare, Sarah wringing her hands, Tom's face flushed with confusion. Richard spun his story, his words a velvet trap. "Emily's been hiding things," he said, gesturing to the safe. "She thinks she's entitled to more than her share. George would be ashamed." Helen's lips thinned, her eyes boring into me. "Is this true?" she demanded. I clutched the key, my throat tight. "Number. I'm trying to protect what Dad wanted, the coins. He hid them for a reason." But Richard was already moving, his hand on Helen's arm, his voice a murmur of pity. "She's grieving, Helen. Let's handle this gently." I wanted to scream, to shove the letter in their faces, but their eyes were on me, heavy with doubt. Mark grabbed my arm, pulling me aside as the others drifted out, Richard's voice still weaving his lies. "He's playing them," Mark hissed, "and they're buying it." I nodded, my chest tight. The key burned in my palm, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. That afternoon I found Laura in the garden, her phone tucked away for once, her eyes on the horizon. She flinched when I approached, but I didn't back down. "What's Richard planning?" I asked, my voice low. She hesitated, her fingers twisting a blade of grass. "He's obsessed," she said finally. "The coins. He's been looking for years. Says they're his rightful share, that George cheated him out of the family fortune." Her voice cracked and she looked away. "He's my father, Emily. I didn't want to believe he'd go this far." I pressed her, my heart pounding. "How far?" She swallowed. "He's been talking to people, collectors. He thinks the coins are worth millions." I left her there, the truth settling like a stone in my gut. Richard wasn't just greedy, he was desperate, willing to tear the family apart for his prize. That night, Mark and I huddled in the guest room, the manor's silence pressing against us. He'd brought his laptop, his fingers flying over the keys. "If Richard's moving fast, there's a trail," he said. "Emails, calls, something." He'd always been good with tech, better than I'd ever given him credit for. It took an hour, but he got in. Richard's email left open on a tablet he'd been careless with. The screen glowed with messages to an auction house, dates and figures that made my blood run cold. "Rare gold coins," one read. 10 in total, discreet sale, immediate transfer. Name your price." Mark leaned back, his face grim. "He's not waiting for the reunion to end. He's selling them out from under us." I stared at the screen, the words blurring. Richard had been planning this for years, manipulating Dad, now us, all for a payout. The family, Dad's dream of unity, was just collateral damage. I thought of the safe, the key, the coins still out of reach. Exposing Richard would break the reunion, shatter whatever fragile trust we had left. But letting him win? That would break me. I paced the room, the floorboards groaning under my steps. Mark watched, his silence heavy. "What's it gonna be, Em?" he asked. "Call him out, or play nice and lose everything?" I stopped, my hand closing around the letter in my pocket. Dad's words echoed in my head. "The coins are yours, Emily, if you can find them. They're proof of what matters most." He hadn't meant the money. He'd meant us, me, Mark, even Laura, the family we could still save. Richard's lies had isolated me, turned the others against me, but I wasn't done. Not yet. I looked at Mark, my resolve hardening. "We open the safe," I said. "We find the coins, and then we show them who Richard really is." His grin was sharp, the first real spark I'd seen in him since he arrived. "Now you're talking." The manor seemed to hum around us, its shadows alive with possibility. Richard thought he'd won, thought his charm and lies were enough. But I had the key, the letter, and Mark. I had Dad's faith, and I was done playing nice. The confrontation. The family faces the truth in a heated showdown. The dining hall was a battlefield, its long oak table gleaming under the chandelier's glow, every chair filled with eyes that cut or wavered. I stood at the head, my hands steady despite the pulse hammering in my throat. The safe sat on the table, its black steel a silent witness to the storm I was about to unleash. In my pocket, Dad's letter was a talisman, its edges worn from days of clutching it like a lifeline. The key rested beside the safe, catching the light, and beside it a stack of printed emails. Richard's betrayal in black and white. The family watched me, their murmurs a low hum of anticipation, suspicion, and dread. I'd called them here to end this, to lay bare the truth about the coins, about Richard, about us. I wasn't sure they'd listen, but I was done hiding. "George, Dad left us something," I began, my voice carrying over the room's restless quiet. I held up the letter, its pages trembling slightly. "He wrote this before he died. 10 gold coins hidden in this house worth a fortune. But they're more than money. They're his trust, his hope that we'd choose each other over greed." I paused, my eyes sweeping the room. Helen sat rigid, her silver hair catching the light like a crown. Mark slouched beside me, his jaw tight, ready to back me up. Laura stared at her hands, her face pale, and Richard. Richard leaned back in his chair, his smile a polished blade, daring me to swing. I laid the letter down and pushed the stack of emails forward. "Richard's been planning to sell the coins," I said, my words sharp. "To an auction house for millions without telling any of us. He's been searching this house for years, lying to you, to Dad, to me." The room erupted. Tom's voice booming with disbelief, Sarah's gasp, Helen's sharp intake of breath. Richard didn't flinch. He stood, slow and deliberate, his laugh a low rumble that silenced the others. "Emily, this is pathetic," he said, his tone dripping with pity. "Forging a letter? Stealing my emails? You're desperate to play the hero, but you're tearing this family apart." He turned to the others, his hands spread wide. "She's lying. George never wrote that. She's after the money herself." The accusation landed like a fist, and I saw it ripple. Sarah's eyes narrowing, Tom shifting uncomfortably, even Helen's gaze sharpening with doubt. I opened my mouth, but Laura's voice cut through, small but steady. "She's not lying." Every head turned. Laura stood, her hands twisting together, her eyes wet. "Dad, he's been obsessed with the coins. He made me help him search, told me it was his right. I didn't want to believe he'd go this far, but..." She choked, looking at Richard, her voice breaking. "I'm sorry, Dad. I can't keep pretending." Richard's smile faltered, just for a second, but it was enough. Helen leaned forward, her voice cold. "Laura, you're confused. Richard's your father. He wouldn't..." But I was ready. I pulled the letter closer, flipping to the second page, where Dad's handwriting scrawled a note I'd found only last night, tucked between the lines. "Read this," I said, sliding it to her. "Dad's words, not mine. Helen's eyes scanned the page, her lips parting as she read aloud, her voice unsteady. Richard's heart is his own, not ours. Trust Emily to guard what matters. The room went still, the weight of Dad's distrust hanging like smoke. Helen sat back, her face unreadable, but the tide was shifting. Tom shook his head, muttering, George always saw through him. Sarah's hand found mine under the table, a quiet alliance. But Richard wasn't done. He slammed a hand on the table, his voice rising. This is a farce. You're all falling for her act. Those coins belong to the family, and I'll make sure we all share the wealth. Emily wants them for herself. His words found their mark. Cousin Ben nodded, his eyes greedy, and another cousin Rachel crossed her arms, siding with Richard's promise of a payout. The family split before my eyes, factions forming, voices clashing. Mark leaned close, his whisper fierce. Show them, Em, now. I nodded, my hands moving to the safe. The key fit like it was born for it, the lock clicking open with a sound that silenced the room. Inside, 10 gold coins gleamed, each one heavy with history, their surfaces etched with symbols I didn't yet understand. But it was the envelope beneath them that stopped my breath. A note in Dad's slanting script. I lifted it, my hands shaking, and read aloud. Emily, you found them. These coins are yours to guard, not to keep. Use them to build what I couldn't. A family that chooses love over greed. I trust you. Always. The words hit like a wave, and I looked up, my eyes burning. Richard's face was a mask, his charm crumbling. Helen's hands were clasped tight, her eyes on the note, something like regret flickering there. Laura was crying softly, and Mark was grinning, fierce and proud. The cousins were a mix of awe and shame, their arguments dying as the truth settled. Ben muttered an apology. Rachel looked away, but Richard pushed forward, his voice desperate now. This proves nothing. George was wrong about me, about all of us. Those coins are mine by right. No, I said, my voice steady, final. They're Dad's legacy, and he chose me to protect it. You've lied, manipulated, tried to break us for your own gain. You're done, Richard. The room held its breath, and then Helen stood, her voice cutting through. Enough. Emily's right. George saw you clearly, Richard, and so do I. She turned to me, her eyes softer than I'd ever seen. What do you want to do with them? I looked at the coins, at the note, at the family, fractured, flawed, but still here. Dad's dream wasn't perfect, but it was ours. We keep them, I said. Not to sell, not to fight over, to remind us who we can be. We'll decide together what's next, but it won't be your way, Richard. The cousins nodded, some reluctantly, others with relief. Laura stepped closer, her hand brushing mine, a silent promise. Richard stood alone, his shoulders sagging, the fight draining from him. He walked out, the door slam echoing like a gavel. The manor seemed to exhale as we gathered around the table, the coins glinting between us. We weren't whole, not yet, but we were here, choosing each other just as Dad had hoped. I folded his note, tucking it beside the letter in my pocket. The fight wasn't over. There'd be more arguments, more wounds to heal, but I'd faced Richard and won. For Dad, for us, I'd keep fighting. A new legacy, the aftermath of the confrontation and Emily's path forward. The manor was quiet now, its halls no longer humming with secrets. Richard's car had disappeared down the gravel drive hours ago, his taillight swallowed by the dusk, leaving a silence that felt like relief. I stood on the porch, the autumn air sharp against my skin, watching the last of the cousins pack their bags. Not everyone stayed. Ben and Rachel left with muttered excuses, their loyalty to Richard's promises fading with his disgrace. But those who remained carried something new in their eyes. Not trust, not yet, but a willingness to try. That was enough for now. Laura found me by the garden, her face softer than I'd ever seen it. I'm sorry, Emily, she said, her voice catching. I let him pull me in, but I want to make this right. With you, with all of us. I nodded, my throat tight, and when she hugged me, it was tentative but real. "We'll figure it out," I said, and I meant it. She'd betrayed me, but she'd also stood up when it mattered. That was a start. Inside, Helen waited in the dining hall, her hands folded like she was bracing for a fight. But when she spoke, her voice was low, stripped of its usual edge. "I ignored your father's warnings about Richard," she admitted, her eyes on the table where the coin still sat, gleaming under the chandelier. "I thought I knew better. I was wrong." The words hung between us, heavy with years of distance. I thought of Dad, his laughter, his stubborn hope, and felt the ache of his absence. "He'd want us to move forward," I said. She reached for my hand, her grip firm, and for the first time I didn't pull away. Mark was in the library, sprawled in Dad's old armchair, the fire casting shadows across his face. "You did it, Em," he said, a grin tugging at his lips. "Faced the dragon and won." I laughed, the sound surprising me. "I had help," I said, nudging his shoulder. He looked at me, serious now. "I'm sticking around this time. No more running. Dad would have wanted that." I nodded, my chest warm. Mark wasn't fixed, none of us were, but he was here. That was more than I'd hoped. The coins went into a trust, their value locked away to keep the manor alive. A shared space for birthdays, fights, whatever came next. I didn't want them sold, didn't want their worth measured in dollars. They were Dad's faith in us, and I'd guard that, not for wealth, but for what it could build. The reunion ended quieter than it began. Fewer voices echoing through the halls, but the ones that lingered carried honesty, raw and fragile. In Dad's study, I sat at his desk, the coin's empty safe open beside me. His letter lay unfolded, its words a steady pulse. "Trust, Emily. That's the real treasure." I felt him here in the creak of the floorboards, the scent of old books, the weight of his hope. The family was bruised, scattered, but not broken. I'd stood up to Richard, held the truth like a blade, and come out stronger. I'd keep fighting for us, for the legacy Dad dreamed of. Not perfect, but ours. I closed the letter, the manor settling around me, and whispered, "I've got this, Dad." The silence answered, warm and sure.